For more on the state of stimulus talks in Washington, right now we welcome Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota. He is, by the way, a member of the Budget Committee. And Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity. Good morning.
Good morning. You know, this is a big move and something a lot of people are watching very closely. I just want to ask you first up, watching executive orders first being used by President Obama and now by President Trump, they have certainly ratcheted up over time. Do you think what the president did was legal with the executive orders?
Well, I think what he did is legal, and that's been demonstrated by the fact that his predecessor did do it so regularly, and that the Supreme Court is, particularly as it relates to the deferral of enforcement actions, the Supreme Court has held up that authority that President Obama, instituted when he was president. So I think that's pretty clear. I think from a, political standpoint, he certainly snared Democrats in their own trap and has flipped the leverage, which I think was probably as important as anything.
Yeah, politically, it was certainly a smart move. But I do come back to this question of what it means for Congress and for the Senate to have so many executive orders, again, through both President Obama and President Trump, that seem to weaken the powers of Congress. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's concerning because obviously our founders created three co-equal branches with the emphasis on co-equal for a reason, and they made big things difficult to do for a reason. But this drift toward more executive orders and more power for the executive branch, it's sort of natural anyway, because the executive branch, while it's co-equal, is made up of one policymaker. So there's an efficiency there. And that efficiency plays itself out in situations like this, a crisis, an emergency, where the emergency powers of the president, along with deferral of enforcement actions, gives him a great deal of unilateral power and authority. But at the end of the day, even that is limited, as we've seen in these four executive orders. While they're very targeted and I think very appropriate, they sort of reward the entire economic spectrum, but in a minimal way. To do the really big things and to do like appropriate and tax, that still requires Congress. But as we get through this, I do think we have to take a hard look at those three co-equal branches, the power, particularly the Article I powers of Congress, and try to restore some of that.
So let's get to where we stand right now when it comes to the stimulus and this relief plan. Do you think that we need a broader agreement, and does this change of the political winds make it more or less likely that there is an agreement between the two parties?
Yeah, it's a great point, because as I mentioned up front, that the political leverage has really flipped here. For the last couple of months, Speaker Pelosi has been rather proud of being able to proclaim that I have all the leverage. Of course, she has the proxy of every Democrat in Congress, both the House and the Senate, and that that is what kept us from really coming up with any type of a bipartisan deal. That, along with the fact that that Republican senators couldn't agree on any one particular plan. But all of that was flipped. So I think it makes it more likely. I think that now that the Democrats can sort of fume about what the president's done, but they can't really argue with the policies behind it, because they're mostly policies that they supported and wanted in a package. Perhaps it brings them back to the table. The question, though, I think, Becky, is it even all that necessary? Because for many of us, we've been concerned, us being Republican senators, we've been concerned about the fact we've already spent $3 trillion taxpayer dollars, almost half of which is still unspent, and certainly the impacts of it are unknown. So, some people, I think, are going to look and go, oh my gosh, we've got to get to the negotiating table and fix this. And others are going to be looking at going, there's no longer a need to get back to the negotiating table because the president has largely fixed it.
Yeah, that's kind of my point with this. I mean, it sounds like you're not necessarily feeling that there's a real rush to get back to negotiation, and maybe what the president's done has taken care of the bulk of what you were concerned about anyway.
Well, I think he has, particularly with the unemployment insurance, making it a more modest, fully funding it largely through two federal programs, giving states and governors the opportunity to opt in or opt out. And then, of course, with the deferral of payroll taxes. As a policy matter, we can have an argument all day long, but for the short term, what he's done is given every working employee, every working man and woman in America that make under $100,000 a 7.5% payroll increase. So, he's taking care of both unemployment and those that are employed, which I think is something that we were missing in the CARES Act that create too much of a disincentive for people to not work. And I think he's sort of equalized that, while also obviously providing this much needed relief for renters and for people with large student loan debt that allows them to either pay it off at 0% or defer it till later, depending on their circumstance. And so there's certainly more that can be done, particularly as it relates to getting kids back to school safely and as it relates to the disease itself. While there's still some funds available and the CDC and the other healthcare organizations continue to work, we need to make sure that our local hospitals and healthcare providers also are properly equipped for, for the task at hand.
I mean, there's so much here. Let's just start with the payroll deferral, the payroll tax deferral. I mean, that seems so complicated. A, for businesses to decide whether they're going to continue to deduct it out of an employee's paycheck. B, if they're going to be able to figure out how to go back and recapture that money at the end of the year if the law is not changed. I mean, how do we deal with this? I can't even imagine what businesses are going to go through in this.
Well, remember, though, businesses were already dealing with a complicated, bureaucracy that was being added to things in the CARES Act, and appropriate and building an airplane while we're flying it. But when it comes to payroll taxes and the deductions, businesses at least are set up to do that. You're right. The rules are a little bit fuzzy at this point as it relates to which fund the dollars come out of. But I would hope that by and large, employers could work with the federal government to find a way and to allow this relief for their employees who are making under $100,000 a year. But it's going to require the agencies to step up and clarify that, which, by the way, I think they've done a marvelous job of in the last 5-6 months through the CARES Act, and are probably better prepared to answer some of these questions than they would have been a year ago.
But, Senator, you understand the problem. If it's not actual forgiveness, if it's really just money that you're just letting me hold on to for now, that could create even bigger problems at the end of the year when you tell me I owe you X amount of dollars. And by the way, it's not going to be taken slowly out of my paycheck. I owe it to you in one lump sum. Well,
therein lies why Congress has to put the meat on the bones of that, if you will, and that's where appropriation comes in. We are obviously coming up against the September 30th end of the fiscal year. We're going to have some sort of an appropriation, probably in a CR, followed by some sort of other appropriation negotiation. Congress, I don't believe, would let that happen. The worst case scenario where the businesses themselves have to drive off of a cliff. The deferral is important, but appropriations requires Congress. And that's, again, why I think what the president has done is he's forced Congress's hand, and Congress has to step up to that plate.
Do you know if Congress is going to be going out for recess as originally planned this week, or is everybody staying there to try and hammer out the rest of this deal?
Well, I believe the Senate will be in session this week. That's the plan, is that we're in session this week. It'll be a bit of a skinny session. There won't be any big votes or small votes unless there's some sort of unanimous consent votes that could happen. But by and large, the negotiators are there. The Senate's in session. Should we need to be called back for a vote of some sort, I think that's important. It's important for the country to see. It's important for the Democrats to know that we are in session and continue to have a desire to negotiate. But as for now, you're not going to see 100 senators in Washington, D.C. unless there's a vote called.
One of the big sticking points for the Democrats has been the idea that they want to see additional money that's set aside for states and local municipalities that have been hit hard by COVID. Where do you come down on that? Would you be willing to give extra money for that?
So this is probably the area that's the biggest disagreement among Republicans themselves. I happen to think that with the balance that many states still have in the CARES Act funding, that they ought to be given more flexibility. Certainly there ought to be some guardrails so that states can't, for example, take whatever they have not yet dispersed, whether it's to municipalities, counties, or spent on state programs, that they can't take it and use it to bail out their public employee pension plans. However, I do think providing them the opportunity to use even more flexibility than the Treasury Department has already given them, and they've given them quite a bit. I mean, they've done all they can, I think, within the law to allow governors some wiggle room. But I'd prefer to see us give them even more flexibility, give governors that flexibility. The problem, Becky, though, in a lot of this is a lot of our members, and I would have to say, those from larger, more populated states, are more concerned about their municipalities than they are their states, because expecting that money to sort of trickle down is a little bit complicated when you have a city, say, of 450,000 or even 1 million people, and they don't have the direct access to that money. The mayors and their city councils don't have the type of flexibility that a governor has. So you're sort of running the gamut there, but I'd say first, let's give them the flexibility to use the balance of the CARES Act in ways that are helpful, or they see as helpful, and then we can address it as we get closer to the end of those funds.
Senator, do you think at the end of this week we'll have a deal that's hammered out between the two parties?
I always like to quote my friend, Speaker John Boehner, who used to say, Congress is a place where things move slowly before they move very fast. I, as an eternal optimist, would love to say I think we will, but I'm not so sure. We'll have to see how today plays out. It's obviously early in the new week, and we'll see what the powers to be say about getting back to the negotiating table. That's clearly what the president wants. He stated it in his announcement. The executive orders are clearly intended to both provide relief where relief is needed, and call the bluff of Democrats in Congress, and hopefully we get back to the table this week. But I can't say with great certainty that I'm confident that'll happen by the end of the week.
Thank you for your time, Senator Cramer. It's good talking to you.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.